I'm looking through you. Where did you go?
Well, good morning, Frank Marrero.
Yes, good afternoon to you too.
Yeah, this is Ed Reether and Frank Marrero once again,
Transcontinental.
recording a conversation. And I want to bring people who haven't watched our last week's discussion, or however you want to talk about your topic that you wanted to bring to B-Zone on adolescence. And so, yeah, so for people who weren't with us last week, you had a discussion about Adidam, but in that context, you spoke about a concept which is known as psychology and developmental psychology anyway, as a sense of growth or adolescence.
A
And
particular sense of a particular growth stage, yes.
yeah, well, as we have to acknowledge the source of our understanding, and it's Adida. And so Adida just does not take this as a kind of psychological concept. I mean, in this book, which is really a culmination of a lot of the writings that he has written over the years, he has a whole chapter in
Moving
there.
beyond childish and adolescent approaches to life and truth. Right.
Right. And
But
I'm not,
let me make one note about that. That was originally a talk that's in Garbage and the Goddess. Then it went into Breath and Name. Then it went into an article in a magazine. Then it went into the Enlightenment of the Whole Body. Then it went in. This is one of the great essays of that because you can see just because he's brought it, he's woven it in again over the years, decades.
yeah, no, I mean, I've taken it from that early form
Hmm.
and if you will, compared it to what is in this latest form. And it's interesting to see how the evolution of his words, not the gist of what he's bringing, because it is allegorical in the sense that he's always speaking to a higher um, understanding of what
Absolutely.
this concept is about. And it's not just an individual psychological growth or development and where the name comes from, but it comes out of a more of a kind of cosmological state of mind.
Right.
Uh,
And it's not just from the human point of view, it's we go through these stages of childhood to go into growing up, whatever that means. And nobody can really talk about it much, but this is within a span of to a full enlightenment, the full span of human possibility. And so that way you see things very differently. It's like imagine that we could, from the prow of a ship with a cartographer, analyze the coastline and get a really good map. Now, imagine that same vision from outer space. Mwah. He is the outer space vision that sees it and sees it with perfect perspective.
right, right. And so, with that in mind, I wanted to you're a writer and also an author of many different pieces of literature, and one of them is I call you a scholar of the Greek tradition or the classical tradition of Western tradition
Mm.
because of your work and what you've published before. But you've got an upcoming book called Nothing Makes Me Happy, which is soon to be published. But in there, you've sent me an essay out of that book. It's called A Crucial Clarity, the Quandary
Mhm.
of Understanding Adolescence.
Right.
So I thought maybe we could talk a little bit if we went over the essay, and when we record this for the public, we'll have the essay up on the screen so people can follow with our discussion, because I would like to, if you are willing to follow the essay to bring this understanding
Yes,
out there
and
and to,
as you pointed out at last talk, in 1989, Adida told me to beware of adolescence. In other words, he heightened for me the trajectory I was about to go on and that I would need to be aware of adolescence as I took on what I was doing. And so, with his empowerment of observation, I then noted adolescence like all the time, and after 30 so years, I had a clarity of understanding about um, sufficient enough to exceed it. Not that I'm done with it, just like I'm not done with being 4 years old either, but I have exceeded something enough to stand on another ground. So then I wrote this essay to kind of massage some of those gifts that he had given me into ordinary speech. So that's a little bit more of the segue from the last one as well. So let's jump in.
Oh, okay, so the article, the essay is called "The Crucial Clarity, the Quandary of Understanding Adolescence," and in the first paragraph, you give a quote of Marshall McLuhan. He says, "We don't know who discovered water, but we're certain of one thing: it wasn't the fish. Telling fish about water is inherently difficult, and this quandary is applicable to all kinds of embeddedness and familiarities. But in
Right.
every case, when unconsciousness or unconscious presumptions are illuminated, a conscious growth and liberation are possible." So that's a very compacted philosophical statement. So let's say, could you just unpack when unconscious presumptions are illuminated, a conscious growth and liberation are possible.
Right.
Mhm.
If you don't know what you're stuck in, you can't be free of it. If you don't know what you're embedded in, it's about embeddedness. Um, Beloved has a talk called Transcendence of Familiarity. And in fact, that's one of the nine great laws, is if you think you know, then you're always going to bring a host. Even your cognitive scientists will tell you this: we don't see the world as it is, we see it as we project. And so we're embedded in a confluence of presumptions. And the more we are blind to those, the more we are used by them instead of being clear about what we're seeing and thinking. And so,
So, this brings us to the second paragraph of the third, really, is the adolescent knower. The
mhm,
adolescent knower, that is the globally accepted medium of our conversation.
right, even now, we're talking in a way that's essentially adolescent. Well, I know this, and let me tell you this. Here's something you should know, and this is, and then we have the adolescent humility that is, well, in my opinion. And so we're all this globally accepted um, medium is adolescence. The scientific mind is an adolescent mind. The let's prove it and let's see what it says. Let's get down to what's real. All that is a function of the mind that can abstract itself and examine things objectively. And
So
go
let me
ahead.
just ask you, because right off the bat, I'm getting a feeling or a sense, and I'm reading it as an audience person would read it. There's a pejorative term here. I mean, adolescence is in a pejorative sense. There's some kind of limitation, and this limitation, I'm assuming, is that in the knowing, you get a sense of somehow of a separation of knowing. So let me finish this. The
Yeah, yeah,
full
no.
implication of these presumptions are as invisible to us as water is to the fish, and we are drowning in limitations we don't see.
Right.
So
So
it's
I
apparent
don't, I
that,
don't, yeah, go ahead.
so, well, it's
Well,
apparent that there's a limitation and a liability of being a knower.
right. That's the pejorative part of it, is the what we don't see. As we will talk about later, also, there's a lot of great things about being an adolescent. You see the scars on my body, and you know, a really smart scientist put that back together. So all praise to the the heightened capability that adolescence also brings, the capacity to be abstract. But what happens, and why this is a quandary, is that we're talking, we're speaking, we're communicating, we're trying to understand in a way the very thing we're trying to talk about. So it's hard, it's going to be hard to see this. And I don't mean it to be pejorative in the sense only that we need to be aware of our presumptions. If we're aware of our presumptions, there's a liberation and a clarity and a rest and more benefits than than even adolescence brings. So
You say in 1989, Adidas personally and directly charged me, with
mhm,
understanding adolescence, and I can finally present the salient features of those illuminations and blessings I received. So this is what the essay is about, is the
right.
lessons that you've received. And so you jump right into an allegory of Socrates in the cave, although it's attributed to Plato, but he's talking about what Socrates said in that. So
Right.
Socrates reveals two kinds of embedded inferiorities. First, there is the mythical mind,
Interiorities, not
inf
inferiorities.
inferiorities,
Interiorities.
interiorities,
Yes.
are the mythical minded people and those who saw the broad outlines of these actual shadows, I'm assuming,
Yeah,
were con
they saw something.
yeah. And then there were the rational persons, the people, knowers, who scoffed at the childish believers, for they knew the profiles on the wall were only projections across the objects from a rational fire. Neither the believers nor the knowers saw their chains nor suspected their interior presumptiveness. So
Right.
most when you get into philosophy and you read about Plato, the superior point of view is, oh, these guys are caught in the illusion, and we know that this is just Maya. This is the illusion, and we have now know we don't take these things too seriously.
Right. But what's not usually pointed out is the knowers in that. I mean, everybody loves to make fun of the people who are just seeing shadows. Easy. Just the mythic minded. But let's also appreciate they are seeing something, even though it's twice removed. But there's something there. The myths, the people who believe in myths and provincial understandings, there's something real there. So let's give them some whatever due they credit they have. But what most people don't um, notice is that the knowers that go, oh, those people, they're just seeing the shadows on the wall. This is real. The adolescent idealizes the waking state. And there they are going, see, the rational fire flashes across that and makes that shadow. We know. So, but they don't notice they're in the cave also. That's that's liberating. That's the great insight. And so the adolescent who gets a sense of that tries to a kind of a humility. Well, in my opinion, and that there's a kind of humility in that, but opinion is still inside a cave.
Well,
And
this
there is
is
a
this. Yeah,
go ahead.
I'm sorry, but this is where the next paragraph brings you, because once you have that presumption that you have a, if you will, superior or a greater point of view, there's a certain kind of, as you
Arrogant.
point out, cunning or some kind of control over this. I can now use this symbolism that I have with my perception and understanding, and I can be clever. And you bring out the Trojan horse
Mhm.
from the Homeric
Yes,
Odysseys.
Iliad and the Odyssey. Yes. Well, but back to the cave um, allegory. Most people don't talk about there's a third point of not point of view. There's a third person in that allegory, and it's not the provincial people, the shadowy people, childish, nor the adolescent knowers, but there is the sunlight man or the sunlight person who does not stand in the cave. What's the cave? The cave is subjectivity. I'm behind my eyes looking out. That's the cave. And if you think it, as Adidas said, when the verbal portion of the mind becomes more or less continuous, we seem to identify with that verbal stream. There's your cave. Are you thinking all the time? That's the cave. So, how do you stand outside of that? Well, the cognitive scientists will tell you that's not possible. But it's what the word they used in ancient Greece, stand out ecstatic. The ecstatic point of view is not limited by time and space and body and mind and presumption. That's what it's standing out of. And there's another order, order of illumination of light itself, the ecstatic point of view that sees the adolescent mind, that sees the adolescent presumptions, and it's formless. It's
It's,
not, it's not known. It's mystery. Go ahead.
well, there's a couple of things I want to unpack. One is the verbal chattering mind, which is what you're associating now with the left hemisphere, and think is well understood to be associated with that.
Yep, absolutely.
And on top of the verbs, the nouns and the verb, there's a concept. There's a certain kind of understanding. There's a higher level of this language that goes on top of that. So
Yep.
we're still all in that kind of conceptual We're not even the perception. We're in the conceptual model
Right.
here. We're just speaking concepts and understanding and knowledge in that kind of left hemisphere of understanding, of mind, of perception, of vision, right?
Right. Hmm.
So,
It's good to illuminate also the word concept and percept. They had the word sept in it. What is it? Sept? Grasp. That's what the word means. Sept, or word morpheme, the word piece. Sept. You grasp it. That's why you say, "Oh, I don't know how to look at it. Oh, I get it now. I've grasped it." Or I don't get that. Oh, I grasp it. I get the concept. That's what the word means. And it's something you do. I, the knower. And uh, and that's why the ecstatic speech is always associated with mystery, not concept.
I was thinking of the people who say, "Oh, I can't get my head around that."
Exactly.
Yeah, I can't quite grasp it.
And of course, we can allude easily to Adida's uh, illumination of the clenched fist as opposed to the open hand. Concept is a form of grasping, both percept and concept.
Now I want to move to the next part of your essay: the good, the bad, and the
Oh, no,
ugly.
let's eliminate first the Trojan War, the
Okay.
because these are the foundation. The Iliad and the Odyssey are the foundational texts of the ancient world, ancient Hellenes, and they center around Odysseus in this way. For 9 years, the Trojans and the Greeks were at a stalemate. 9 years, long time. So I have these gods that are helping me. We have these gods that are helping us. Yes, but our armies are powerful. Our armies are powerful, and that was a stalemate. So at the level of vital and mythic confrontation, there was an equality. So what happened after 9 years? Odysseus came up with the idea of taking the Trojans' mythic animal, the horse, and making a gift out of it. Because if they had made the Greeks' mythic animal, they would have seen through it because it had been objective. So the mind that understands mythology can manipulate the other's mind, mythological mind. So here is an advent. This is the advent of cunning mind. That's why it's there. They say the Trojan War was about 1200 BC, something like that. Depends on who you read. But right about then in history, not that there had never been adolescents or even enlightened people before that, but the cultural advent of something stronger than vital strength and mythology made a cultural appearance. And that's what won the war. Now, that's the Iliad. The Odyssey is now Odysseus wants to go home, and he's we could go into that a long time, but he can't make it home because when you start thinking all the damn time, you can't get back to the heart. Because thinking and thanking used to be one word, and then thinking separated out from thanking. And when you start thinking all the damn time, it's hard to learn to rest back in thanking. So it's an odyssey to resolve the mind back into the heart. That's why it's an odyssey. So these are the foundational text, barely understood, but people did get it, that the advent of cunning has great power and a great burden.
So in a lot of ways, we're all on an odyssey.
If your thanking is not stronger than your thinking, you are on an odyssey. Yes.
And if you're not, you're just in this kind of what you're given as a worldview, as an understanding of where you are. You're just believing what you're told to believe. You're in that kind of childish inheritance of what you've been brought up to.
Yes. The provincial mind that just sees the shadows on the wall. So and then there's a host of things that the Hellenes or Greeks brought to this. Athena was born out of the forebrain of Zeus, cunning, the goddess of cunning.
Well, this is
Uh,
where you get into the next paragraph. And so I'll just read
let's
a little
go.
bit of it. So Athena, so you get into the next section of your essay. It says the good, the bad, and the ugly. Athenia, the goddess of cunning, was born full grown from the forebrain of Zeus. It is
Mhm.
no accident that the Western crystallization of logic and science could be said to have begun in and around the golden age of the Athenians. Science from
Skio is,
has
yeah,
set the world free of 10,000 methodological imperfections and produced the modern world. So basically, you're saying this is the birth of science.
it is the birth of science in some sense. That's why all the sciences, the father of this science, the father of that science, they're all Hellenic, basically, because there was this moment of the cultural appearance of this. Skio is further rooted in if you want to go back to Sanskrit with it, which is always good if you can, it's our word shed is when you make a shed, you separate the rain's coming down, you make a shed, you separate a dry section from the wet everywhere. That's kind of the essence of it. You separate something out. You set off something in that way. Skio, shed is a really good root word to understand this capacity. It's a capacity to go, well, in science and in developmental psychology, the bad, as we're getting to soon, separates not only our capacity to see something objectively, as if, but it separates us out subjectively as well. So anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself.
Well, no, I mean, you're bringing up a fundamental division of understanding that before you were just in a story, in a myth, and
Hmm.
now you somehow, at least the evolution of what you're speaking about, now you have this kind of knowledge developing that from Aristotle and categories and separation out and logic becomes the word, logos becomes the foundation of, I guess, Western, at least from my understanding, the Western
Something like it.
tradition.
Close enough. True enough to be said is often been said. Yeah,
Well, is
exactly.
this is what has sewn up your arm, right?
Exactly. That's why I'm living alive today.
And so your next paragraph now gets into some of the limitations here. Unfortunately, the same abstractions that set things apart to be examined, which is valuable, inflicts the same abstraction upon our very selves.
And every adolescent,
Unknowing,
yeah, every adolescent knows what it's like to not to be abstracted from yourself. You're just caught in this chatterbox above, and you're just thinking all the time, and you not only make an objective world, you make a subjective world that's you can't feel. Remember that old song back in what was it in the 70s? I just dropped in to see what condition my condition was in.
well, if you saw it in the developmental sense psychologically, this is the separation from the parent. You're no longer just the child. You're now an independent individual separated from your mother and father. And the goal is to grow beyond that and become an individual. So, there's a certain sense of that. It has to happen.
Well, yeah, but as we get on here in the essay, there it's not possible to become independent. Does not exist. There's not a molecule of wood in this wall, quote unquote, that is independent. It's all, we're growing out of dependence, because up until about age 12, it's mom, can I do this? Dad, can I have some money? Mom, can I, borrow whatever? There's an underlying and background mood of dependence. As soon as the adolescence starts to emerge, there is a rejection of subjugation and of do what you're told. No, I want to think for myself, because the advent of the adolescence is the advent of mind. Whereas in the first stage, it's your existence makes most sense in bodily terms, and in the second 7 years, it makes sense in emotional terms, energetic terms. But after somewhere after puberty and the awakening of the mind, or the lower mind, the cunning mind, you have to understand things. I want to know. I know. I will. So that transition is not well understood. It's not about being independent.
Well,
It's
now you're going against the grain of Jungian psychology here, because Jungian psychology is all about individuation. It's
Well, yeah,
all
like I said, from the prow of a ship, a piece of coastline can look like something, but if you look at it from outer space, it fits within a grand whole.
right. So we're not throwing, if you will, the baby out with the bathwater here.
or the punk out with the bathwater. Yes.
No. So you in your next paragraph, you point to a thing called the imprisonment in the chatterbox, the imprisonment of
Right.
this. This is now, it's not just this kind of free state that you can objectify things.
No.
There's a certain sense of imprisonment or confinement.
To the chatterbox above your shoulders. It's a box. One of my favorite songs by The Who is "No one knows what it's like to be the bad man, to be the sad man behind blue eyes." And there is everybody knows what it feels like to be imprisoned in your head. Chatterbox going on, and you can't get out of it.
Well,
And
this is that imprisonment is what Arida refers to as the dilemma
right,
and the origin of the search.
right. Well, the dilemma comes about from the fact that prior to the onset of adolescence, you're dependent, but then you go toward independence, which is illusory. You want to be individuated, but independence doesn't exist. So you go back and forth between independence and dependence, and that's the origin of the dilemma. And then, as there is a adolescent self that gets inside the head, narcissism of adolescence, and that has its own peculiar flavor of narcissism. And
I
so,
was thinking of a distinction that Arida makes between individuation and separation.
exactly,
And this is critical in the understanding of what you're speaking about,
right,
because it's really about separating, not individuating.
right, exactly. So it's
Right.
just fine to be unique and individual, but not withdrawn.
Right. Which in his book now starts the whole dilemma, starts the whole crisis of search and fear and everything else. So now the Odyssey, now it begins. The Odyssey, the cast of the cunning. We cling to our cunning, the answer. No wonder it takes forever. It gets worse. In our early childhood, there is a pervasive mood of dependence, needing sustenance, approval from mommy and daddy. And then you say, I learned from Arida with the advent of adolescence and the insistence on our own independence. We
Mm-hmm.
painfully discovered that there is no real independence, and the mood of dependence is replaced by the alternation between dependence and independence in the mood of dilemma.
Right.
Now only are we subjectively thinking, we're always in a dilemma. That's the bad news. And
No
that's
shit. And I was reading in Enlightenment of the Whole Body. I think it's the ultimate identity of the body, of the identities and the current of the whole body. But he was talking about the when you are incomplete or failing in this capacity to accomplish, finish, and mature in adolescence, and you're stuck in the mind. He says, then when you even consider your foot, doesn't it seem to be down there? The identity of being inside your head makes all the world a place of dilemma. It's it's down your foot. Even your foot is down there. So that's hell, as we all know. It's depressing, and we all have to have all had to suffer it. But there's something. Let me jump ahead. Let me give a little peek into the finishing of this. What's the end of adolescence? When you understand that it's not going to be another really great idea that solves your endless thinking. It's when you understand that harmony, life harmony, trustable, peaceful, harmonic existence, because subjectivity follows action. You bring your life into harmony. You submit not to another, but to the wisdom you see to be true, and you willfully conform your life to this. Then slowly that chatterbox dissolves, and it's just a useful tool. So dilemma has its function in terms of driving. It is, as long as it's there, you need to harmonize your life to the law of life, which is giving, sacrifice, not I'm going to do it, I'm succeeding, my achievement. There is an end to adolescence, and it does calm the mind, but as an effect, not as a primary thing. We give our life up to harmony. We give our life up into wisdom. We submit. We surrender. The very things that adolescents are braced against. And then the chatterbox melts away.
Well, this is where you get into Parmenides, who pointed
Parmenides.
out,
Mm-hmm.
as you say, he pointed out that to understand the way of unconcealed truth, we must understand the interiority of opinion.
Right.
In today's adolescent world, it is a violation of norms to speak of truth beyond point of view.
In my opinion, that's standard mantra.
In my opinion, we must be critiqued is not the attempt at humility nor the nihilism and forms of cognitive science, but rather the entire and unexamined subjective framework that disallows and dismisses the paradoxes of ecstatic speech. So maybe you could unpack a little bit of what I just read.
Yeah, well, knowers don't want to talk about not knowing. What's the forbidden subject in studying Socrates? I only know that I don't know. It's a forbidden subject because everybody wants to wait what Socrates said and Plato's apology and blah blah blah. It's all knowers. And the thing that's most avoided is talking about mystery. The thing that's most avoided is talking about that which is beyond concept.
You just undermined all the academics that I work around because they're standing up on that podium
Right.
telling me and everybody else.
Podium and pedestal. Yeah, and it's knowledge is really important. But if you hold it, like I like to say, if you hold a raisin close enough to your eye, you can blot out the entire sun. So we love concept. We love concepts. I love science. It's just small compared to the magnificence of real existence.
The knowers tend to make it much more complicated and require so much more involvement in the dilemma to solve the dilemma, because it just gets more complicated and more complicated and more complicated, and it just never seems to end. It's always another round that needs.
Another island that Odysseus has to stop at. Yes,
This is the never-ending search for the end of the story,
that's right.
or the finality of the dilemma, because this is where the root, the cause of all this searching is.
Grounded.
As we
It's grounded in that dilemma. You're right, and and when we percept, when we don't see the grasping, and the grasping makes a tension. Tension wants to be relieved, and you're pinching your ass, and therefore you're looking for the relief of what you are doing, and that's what makes the search. Is Adida, it enlightens us.
it is interesting, because he does point to a place where this left brain verbal activity that we're addressing here gets into the feeling perception,
Mm.
which does not have understanding attached to it. He equates perception in a sense of freedom, meaning that you're free from the understanding,
From the
and
conceptual understanding, yes.
the conceptual, where you're now into the feeling dimension of the world does not go away. Okay, so
Exactly. But he also says even the perception has to be let go too. So it's not, and he points
object.
out, if you're overwhelmed by the conceptual mind, resort to the perceptual mind. Have a hot bath and a glass of wine or whatever. Just
Have a joint. Have a joint.
yeah, have a resort to the perceptual mind, which is more primary, and so that then you're relieved of the focus into the conceptual to the perceptual. Hooray! I'm a big fan, but even that has to be yielded beyond.
Right, but it does give you it does break you past your at least
It
some
takes you out of the
level.
prison, takes you out of the prison hard. Yes,
But it gets you into a feel. It brings you to feeling. It brings you
right,
to some sense of feeling. So
right.
we may speak about the three hearts, maybe, or whatever, because there's a whole dimension of body to this understanding here. But the bookends of adolescence. Let's just jump to that.
Okay.
Developmental psychology has much to reveal about understanding adolescence. One characteristic that is prominent at its onset is the rejection of the parental-child pattern.
Mhm.
Of course, we all remember rejection or rejecting childish dependence on our parents and standing up for ourselves, or coming to terms with making our own decisions somewhere in our early teens. And then you get into the Magna Carta, the Declaration. Now you're going from the individual to the state, to the nation, to politics, to the evolution of
Yeah,
Western tradition here, from
yeah.
kingships and serfs to now we're into the Magna Carta and the Declaration of Independence.
Declaration of Independence. Well said. Declaration of Independence. And I would argue that now since we do not understand adolescence, we are suffering the shadow side of the Declaration of Independence with both sociologically, historically, culturally, and individually. In that is, we are now subject to hyper independence. Nobody can tell me what to do. I can eat as much as I want. Nobody can tell me what to do. I believe Trump is really the Jesus Christ. Whatever. There's this hyper independence that is insidious. The mood of enlightenment in the classical Renaissance sense that brought forth something like the Declaration of Independence did not foresee this hyper independence poison that is the shadow side of it. as we move from parent-child forms, parent-child meaning king, subject, we move from that from the Magna Carta, the king can't violate his own laws, to the Declaration of Independence, to hell with the kings. What's the mantra? Equality. Equality is the trumpet of the adolescent.
Oh,
And
freedom,
yes,
freedom,
but freedom,
liberty.
freedom, equality, and liberty. Yes, just like the French love to say. But that's that is so useful and true and necessary where there is inequality, where there is prisons. That has a place, but it's not God. It's not. You need to grow up and be yourself, no doubt about it. And the thousands of movies that he followed his own path, she did it because she knew, and all that kind of archetypes that come about from this change are useful and necessary. You do have to achieve. You do have to find your own voice. You do have to stand in your own power. Yes, 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 yes. But that's not how intimate life works. That's not
Well,
how.
let me
Okay,
jump to the paragraph that you're addressing here is
okay, sure.
the maturity of adolescence.
Yes,
The maturity of adolescence is served in discernment of what is harmonious, moral, and true.
right.
When we apply our strengthened will to conform our behavior and lives to this harmony, the
Yes,
discernment for our task of harmony and true morality is mature when it applies the will in a steady and realistic manner that is neither
not
too loose nor too tight, just like
tuning,
instrument
tuning a stringed instrument.
stringed
Yes,
instrument. In the words of Mae West, I'm all for the restraint, just so long as it doesn't go too far.
Mae West. My God, you gotta love her. Exactly. What a Socratic statement, by the way. I'm all for restraint, just so long as it doesn't go too far. In other words, we're not about being right and good. To hell with that. As Adida says, discipline without celebration is obnoxious. So we do have to bring a wise harmony to our life activities. This is what calms the mind. And then the mind can fall into the heart. There's a couple points about the end of adolescence. One, it's characterized by surrender. Now, that's practically, that sounds so much like subjugation. People cringe when they hear the word. But it's, do you give yourself up? That's what the word surrender means, actually. Sur, which is the French form of Uber, and render, which is rooted in the word da, by the way. So when you give yourself up, that's very active. Subjugation is something that happens to you, passive. We understand why we want to react against that. But surrender is willingly giving instead of passively. Subjugation is being passively thrown down. Subjugation, passively yoked. And subject, being a subject of a king, thrown down. Those are passive. Surrender's active. It's willingly giving yourself. Now, when you fall in love, fall, not achieve. Adolescent loves to achieve, but love is not achievable. We give ourselves over to it. So that's one side of the end of adolescence, the willing surrender. The other is what makes that also strengthens and makes that possible is the yielding to wisdom, yielding to what is true, right, and harmonious. It's the confrontation with the father force, with the demand, not because, well, I'm not going to, if somebody says you have to eat only green beans, well, I'm not going to do that, the adolescent would say. But if you understood that doing that is wise, it's true, it'll make your feeling freer. Oh, sure, I'll do that. It's when you submit to wisdom, which means submit to discipline, the very thing that from a childish point of view is horrific and wrong, partially wrong anyway. And then so you have two signposts at the end of adolescence: the free embrace of discipline and the willing surrender. Socrates loved to point out, whether it's true or not, that sophos, or wisdom, was rooted in sophristene, restraint. So we have to freely embrace a disciplined life because we understand it's true, not because somebody told us. And
Well, let me ask you this, because I can read discipline as, I mean, I was in the army, right? So there's discipline of being in the
but
army, and it's
that's a
different than,
childish discipline too, right? You do what you're
well,
told.
I mean, this is where we need a little discrimination in what we're speaking about, because up and
Right.
down.
You're not doing this because you're told. That's for sure. That would be a childish point of view relative to it. You're doing it because you see that it's right. It's true. And
Well, this,
you bring your will to conform the life. You're not made free by thinking. You're made free by the life conforming to what is wise, what is harmonious.
right.
And that understanding, you're in the self place that you struggled and paid your dues to stand in right fucking on. My understanding, my power, my achievement, my voice, authenticity. So we go from childish, what I call Popeye being, I am what I am and I am what I am, to authentic being. This is what I think. I've 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 struggled and suffered hard to understand this is how I feel, authentic being. But then there's another form which transitions and stands in harvesting the strength of authenticity, and it's called supreme being. That's the real relief. Authentic being is just a roadside uh, picnic along the way between childishness and supreme being. In our time in history, we're all about authentic being. Well, terrific. That's necessary, but it's not supreme being. Now, authentic being is really important because you have the third stage of life, or the adolescent phase. You have to integrate all the pieces of the body, mind, self, social, environmental world into a whole. That is a sign that surrender and wisdom have started to become fruitful. That's not the fourth stage of life. That's just the completion of the third integral world. It's necessary and great, but it's about the harmonization. The harmonization becomes an integral event. But that's just the ground. Then you see what is greater than mind. You feel the, not just the whole, the supreme being, divinity, and you willingly surrender. You fall in love. Nothing you can achieve.
Well, I'm reminded because am involved with this course I'm teaching on mind expanding substances, and I'm going into the literature and everything from down in Ecuador in the earliest part of the 20th century to people who are experiencing a sense of being home, a sense of, oh my God, meaning there's a sense through these chemicals that people are and have been experimenting with for now going on, at
A
least in the
vision of
West.
a vision of one being. Yes,
Well, not just a vision, but a feeling sense.
that's what I meant.
Oh,
Yes, it's
yeah.
not abstract. It's not abstract. Yes.
No, it's not. It's not a mind game. This is where the heart really has to speak to the primary sense of understanding, because this is always in these kinds of this and that's and up and down and perceptual, conceptual. But once this begins to understand the feeling sense of connection, then you can then understand that there's something else going on here.
Right, exactly. And we could spend a long time, and let's have another time when we sit and appreciate and critique such an approach. No doubt about it. Uh,
Well, let
but
me just jump back to your essay, because this is really
yeah,
what I want to stay with. It says to recognize that we have been subject to a worldview that is partial, manipulative, and
mhm,
separative. It is only partially solved by understanding and adapting to a holistic, participatory, and integral view.
right.
While changing our point of view is necessary, it is in life that the full change and new adaptation is empowered and enacted. So, yes, we can get these insights. We can get a moment of satori. We can see whatever that feeling, what I was referring to earlier.
And we
But
can feel
now,
integrated with everything.
you're addressing something that has to be adapted to. Now you've got another level of responsibility going
That's
on. So maybe you could,
not achievable. The adolescent, one of the tasks one is to achieve, because in the adolescent phase we have to learn to become clear in our focus, and by doing that we do that with achievements, whether it's getting a job or getting a degree or serving, just that focus, to have that be clear. And achieving is huge, climb the mountain as the archetype, right? And but the transition out of adolescence is not achievable. It's not something you do. And there's somewhere in the essay talking about the four forms of Dionysus, the god of ecstasy. He, Dionysus had an adolescent phase where he was called Dendrite, and he was just nurtured. He was taken to the forest Nysa, where he was fed by the nymphs and courted by the muses, and I mean, educated by the muses, and had a nurturing, strengthening of pleasure and understanding in the ordinary sense. Well, the that word nurturing, that's a direct translation of adolescent. Adolescence is the past present participle. Adult is the past present participle of adolescence. Adolescence, these are Latin words. So we are nurtured until we grow full in that strength of pleasure, of accomplishment, our own feelings. That's great, necessary. But then how does how does Dendrite transition to Dionysus? The goddess Rhea. Now, Rhea is the mother of even Zeus, which means brightness. So the mother of primal brightness, the great goddess power. They call it the secret women's mysteries. She comes when the nurturing is full and baptizes Dendrite into the secret women's mysteries. And by this baptism, by this gift, Dendrite changes into Dionysus, the god of Nysa, the god of ecstasy. We do not achieve adulthood by our own will. We only achieve the fullness of adolescence by participating willfully in willful harmony, willful accomplishment. But what we then must do is yield. Yielding is not something you do. Oh, I'm the best yielder there is. Sounds like Trump. That that's not how you do it. It's something that you give. You don't achieve love. You fall in love. And if love were achievable, there would be it would be a lot of loving going on. But you can't do that. It's like the muses. Muses are also all women, because they emphasize the role of receptivity in the process of inspiration. You have to give yourself up. Give yourself up. That word is surrender in French. So this transition from pleasure to ecstasy, well, let me think of a great quote of our beloved genius, enlightened liberator, Adida. Sacrifice, he says, is the bridge between pleasure and ecstasy. Sacrifice is the bridge between pleasure and ecstasy. Yielding changes dendrite to Dionysus. It's not something you do, you achieve. You make yourself available to that grace. You fall. So that's the transition. It's not something, adolescence and all its achieving and all of its nurturing, let's all do it with incredible force and style and class. But then at some point, it's not something you do anymore. You have to yield either to the muse or to the great goddess herself and sacrifice. Give yourself up willingly. Willful rejection in the beginning, willingly giving yourself in the end. That's the transition to true adulthood. That's when adolescence becomes past perfect participle. Adult is the past perfect participle of adolescence. So
I hope you have stayed with us in this discussion. And if it is all interesting, the next chapter we will discuss on Friday. So I want to thank you very much, Frank, for what you've done here in our time together.
terrific. All righty.